Hello, and welcome to a brand new episode of the Live Shit Get Banged podcast. We have been away for a little break over Christmas. I hope that everybody had a gorgeous Christmas and fantastic New Year's. And I am genuinely so excited to get stuck in to this new season of the pod. We've been doing lots of work behind the scenes, brainstorming new ideas. We've made big improvements to our audio quality, our production. We've got guests coming up and some really exciting topics to share with you all. And today's episode is specifically tailored to something that a lot of people do in January, and that is going sober or experimenting with mindful drinking or sobriety for either the whole of January. Maybe you are doing a damp January, maybe you're doing 100 days sober, or maybe you're simply considering sobriety in the future or mindful drinking in the future. And if so, this episode is for you. So, a little bit of background because this is a topic that is very much close to heart. I started exploring drinking more mindfully in 2019. And since then, I've had quite a few sobriety stints. These have coincided sometimes with fat loss phases that I have done. But the main reason that I decided to start exploring sobriety was for my mental health. Now, a lot of you guys are dipping into reducing alcohol intake for the purpose of being in a Cali D. But I know that some of you are exploring the concept of drinking less to support your mental health as I did. I am a party girl through and through. I love music. I love electronic music. I love a festival. I love a rave. I always have done and I always will. I started going to underage raves and squat raves when I was just 15 and I fell in love with the scene, the music. Almost all of my closest friends I have met through raves, parties we would throw, events, and our shared love for music and dancing and just getting wild together. And with that and just the journey of being a reckless teenager came lots of alcohol, lots of party powders, and it was only as I entered my mid-20s I realized that I had started to depend on alcohol a little bit more than I wanted to. It got to a point where I was drinking every day, sometimes in the daytime, sometimes during work hours. So I used to work in the events industry and it would be very easy to sneak off to the pub at lunchtime or have a cheeky drink whilst throwing an event for a client. I was drinking quite a lot to get drunk. So I would go to my boyfriend's at the time, midweek, to go and see him. And I would buy 3 bottles of rosé and literally just drink the first one to take the edge off and bring a little bit of calmness to my mind. And then the other 2 were for either backup or getting drunk, and maybe I would share some with him as well. And it's something that we then looked back on and thought, oh my goodness, it's crazy how much you used to drink back then. But at the time, my anxiety was so intense. I think where I had built up a lot of my friendships and relationships whilst being drunk, I found it really difficult to speak to a lot of my closest friends and even my family because I've become so accustomed to it without having a drink beforehand. And I would plan a lot of things around when I could next have a drink. So, for example, if we were going out for lunch or going out for dinner, my first thought would always be, when can I drink? And I was drinking in secret. So I would meet my friends and on the way there, I would have a drink beforehand just to kind of loosen myself up so I could have a conversation. And I think it was there almost to not get drunk, but just get away from being sober and to blanket that anxiety. I remember a really key point for me was I went to go and meet one of my best friends. This woman has been my best friend for a long time. We even lived together at one point, and I pulled up to her house. And beforehand, I went into the shop to get 2 tinnies, the 8% ones, because obviously I was looking for the highest percentage. And I necked 2 tinnies before I could go into her house. And bearing in mind I was driving, I remember thinking to myself, this isn't okay. I'm doing this without her knowing. I'm doing it because I feel like I have to, and I'm doing it because I feel like I can't have a conversation without that edge being taken off. And at the time, my sleep was fucking awful because I would drink to sleep and I would be out of the pub until super late. And it was just a really toxic cycle of alcohol being such a big part of my life, but almost quietly. It quietly crept in over the years. And it was at that point I realized that I wasn't able to do normal things without it. I'm going to read you a phone note that I have from 2020 talking through. So I used to journal quite a lot on my phone. And this is a phone note that I've got from that time when I'd started to have these realizations. And I wrote this at 21 past 10 at night. So clearly I was going through something and journaling it out. And I called it Alcohol Breaking the Cycle. It really hit me around November last year that I needed to make a solid change. It hit me like a ton of bricks. I looked back on the time I spent with people and wished I could have been sober for them. My relationship with my friends and family felt like a blur. Key events in my life felt like a blur. My whole life never really being present for anything, just feeling like a blur. At the time, thinking about going sober for even a few days felt so alien. On paper, you're the crazy fun one that everyone can depend on and have a drink, and to get wild on any occasion. But inside, that's just not how you feel. Was I the only one that couldn't go one day without having a drink? Was I the only one that didn't know how to be myself without being drunk? Was I the only one that couldn't complete normal tasks like having a conversation or meeting a friend without thinking about when I could next have a drink? Nobody around me had ever mentioned any of these things, and I knew that they were more capable of doing these normal things without alcohol being involved. It made me feel really alone. How was everybody else coping? And I had become so dependent. So, this was what I had journaled out then. It was a really long process of starting to have this awareness and then going through the process of slowly coming away from that. And I'm talking a good 5 years, I think, until it had its full circle moment and I realized that I no longer felt that dependence. And this year actually is the first year that I haven't done dry January, and that is because I don't feel like I need to. The phases of sobriety that I did were really tough and I learned so much in them. And I think the last one that I did actually felt easy. It felt more natural because once again that dependence wasn't there. And over the years, I have actually slowly started reintroducing alcohol in a mindful way. So, for example, going out and just being able to have a beer and really enjoying it. I also started going to events like music events, raves, parties, and being sober for them and learning to just have one glass instead of one glass turning into two, three, four. The rest of the night is a write off. And just doing things that I normally would have automatically associated with drinking sober. And it took a really long time to, first of all, come away from alcohol, but then also slowly reintroducing it again. So, some of you guys may not feel like this. I mean, I'm sure a lot of you perhaps haven't gone through that journey, but I think it's important to talk about everybody's experiences. And although some of you may just be doing this for fat loss, something that I've said there may have resonated with you or you can feel familiarity in. And I just want to say that there's no reason to feel shame around that. I used to feel a lot of shame and almost label myself as, I've got a problem. I shouldn't be feeling like this. And it can feel quite lonely. So, to anyone out there who is listening to this, just knowing that you're not alone in this. And I want to go through a few considerations for somebody who is maybe introducing sobriety for the first time, and a couple of general tips for anybody who is doing dry January just for health purposes or just for the sake of being in the Cali D as well. So, whatever category you fall in, this information will apply to you, and hopefully, you will find super, super helpful. So, point number one I wanted to make is that people often expect that when you start reducing alcohol from your day to day, that you probably would have an instant improvement in your sleep and your mental health and your energy levels. But actually, when you first come away from alcohol, it can feel quite difficult to suddenly get your sleep back in order and for your mental health to be in a good place. And if anything, if you are somebody who has been quite reliant on alcohol, so for example, you're quite used to having a cheeky nightcap, or when you get stressed, you'll have a glass of wine, or when you get in from work, a glass of wine is how you unwind, it might actually feel really tough and quite mentally taxing to come away from that because all of a sudden you don't have your coping mechanism. Your sleep may even get worse if you have been suppressing emotions quite a lot. You might find that emotions come up that you haven't tackled before and you've not processed and experienced before. So, what I did actually 2 years into my sobriety mindful drinking journey is I started therapy. And I wish I'd done it sooner, if I'm completely honest, because I had a lot of things that came up for me that I didn't expect to come up and emotions that I had previously just brushed under the carpet with alcohol. And it was interesting. And once I'd spoken to a therapist about it, I was able to address those emotions. So expect some tough times, expect probably a few nights or a lot of rough nights sleep, and that's okay. It means that your body is doing its thing and coming back to its neutral space. Number two is exploring different methods to replace the urge to drink or replacing those emotions that sometimes we might mask with drinking. So, this could be a number of things. It could be excitement, it could be sadness, it could be anxiety, it could be anger, it could be frustration. This will look very different for everybody. But a lot of the time, we use alcohol as a way to induce a certain emotion. So we get in from work, we're feeling fucking stressed. We're like, give me a glass of wine. And then we're like, I can relax. But actually, what we need to do instead of just taking it away is think about ways that we can replace that transition. So, this might actually look something like leaning more into exercise. So, this is something that I personally did when I was feeling restless. I would go for a walk, I would go to the gym, I would do a class. If you're somebody who feels quite restless, it might also be simply doing something with your hands. It could be coloring, knitting, writing, playing games. And it's really worth thinking about times when you do lean into reaching for alcohol more. So, for example, if it's in the evening, finding a routine entirely to replace that. So, instead of coming home from work and having a drink, can you come home from work and put some music on, or have a hot shower and get into your pajamas, or give your partner a cuddle, or play with your pets, or journal when you get in, light a candle. And it's all about identifying times when you feel that alcohol is needed and replacing it with something else. Because if we take it away without anything to actually navigate those emotions and that transition, it will feel really fucking tough. Number three, when you have the urge to have a drink, it is useful to ask ourselves the following and start to think about actually identifying those emotions that we've just mentioned. So, number one, am I hungry? Do I need to eat? Am I feeling angry? Do I need to work through some feelings? Do I need to go and do a boxing class? Do I need to ring up a friend and have a rant? Do I need to run around the house and scream and shout for a little bit? Am I feeling lonely? Do I need to speak to a friend? Do I need to text my mum? Do I need to listen to a podcast with a familiar voice on so I've got that feeling of connection? Am I tired? Like, do I need to sleep? And even if you don't need to sleep, do I need to just shut my brain off from emails and work stress and the chaos of day to day life? Number four, I think this one really slots in nicely to what we've just been talking about, replacing the action of drinking, and that is investing in good alcohol free alternatives. Something that was a big barrier for me actually was the cost of fun drinks like elderflower or ginger ale or alcohol free beverages. And I think, well, it's not got any alcohol in it, so why do I want to spend £5 on a drink? Bitch, you will spend £5 on a bottle of wine minimum. And finding something that is novel, that feels a little bit special, which feels like a treat, can be so helpful, not only when you're at home, but when you're out and about as well. So, for example, instead of just being like, oh, I'll have a Diet Coke or I will have a glass of water, that's not going to give you that same satisfaction and that same urge as having a glass of wine or Prosecco or a beer would have done. When I first started this journey, there were shit options for alcohol free alternatives. Actually, interestingly, at the time, like I said, was working in events and I was actually managing a pub at one point. I know before coaching, my career background is very, very interesting. That's a conversation maybe for another day. But there was one point I was managing a pub and I did a whole project on introducing and sourcing alcohol-free alternatives because I was so hyper-fixated on this at the time. I was like, there needs to be a solution. There needs to be more support. And at the time, we only had Beck's Blue behind the bar, which if anyone's had Beck's Blue before, it tastes like absolute shit. It's like a watery, taste-free beer. And I worked with, so it's quite a popular brewery that I used to work for, well known in the UK. And I worked with head office to introduce alcohol-free spirits. So we did an alcohol-free gin. We eventually introduced Heineken 0% and other alcohol-free alternatives like ciders, etc. as well. And these days there is basically an alcohol-free version of every drink. So even craft beers, gins, different spirits. I think Captain Morgan's like spiced even has an alcohol-free alternative now, and there is so much to choose from. So go and check it out. Even at New Year's and Christmas this year, we had Prosecco, and it tastes exactly the goddamn same. Number 5, if you have gone from drinking large amounts quite frequently, or even just you've been drinking quite a lot over Christmas and you've been splurging up over Christmas and New Year's, you might find that you get more sugar cravings and that you're finding that you're kind of craving sweets. And this is because of a couple of things. When you have alcohol, obviously it has a lot of sugar in. And when you drink, you will experience higher peaks and troughs of your blood glucose levels, but also because of your dopamine. So dopamine is your reward hormone. It is stimulated when we have something that is a reward. So when we scroll on our phone, when we are gambling and we have a win, when we drink alcohol, when we eat foods that are interesting to our taste palette and excite us. And when alcohol is taken away, not only do we have that urge of, I want to have sugar because of that kind of palatable craving, but also our hormones are telling us that we want that quick reward. And something that I honestly found so helpful is lean into having some sweets. When that craving comes in, if that is going to help you from not reaching for a drink, have some sweets, have some Haribos on hand, or even something like a sugar-free, but something that tastes sugary drink. So I really love kind of sugar-free sodas like Zero Fanta or Diet Coke can be fantastic. And it's not forever. You can wean off them later on, but just for now to make your life so much easier. The next point, I've actually forgotten what number we're on now, but the next point, plan non-drinking activities with your friends. Now, this is fucking huge. This is such a big one. And I was talking to a few clients about this week in the group coaching, because the first hurdle for most people is meeting their friends for dinner. I was actually talking to a friend and they said they were going to do dry January. And then on the 9th of January, I got a text that said, Soph, we've given up on dry January. We ended up having a bottle of wine and, my inhibitions are over, which I thought was hilarious. But it can be so difficult to socialize, especially in the UK and in Europe. It is very much part of our culture to go to the pub, to go for a drink. And I couldn't encourage enough to start exploring different types of activities with your friends that don't involve dinner and that don't involve having a drink. I found it incredibly hard to go out for brunch or go out for dinner, and the focus was just on, you're not drinking, or I'd have to try and put a conversation together and I'd be so fucking anxious. And even if my friend wasn't thinking it, that's all I was thinking about is, I'm not drinking. I can't do this without having alcohol. And it was, I'm glad that I did it. I'm glad that I did go through a couple of those moments, but you can make it so much easier by just planning activities that don't involve that, or like the focus isn't food or drink. And something that I found incredibly helpful was actually the activities that I did plan were activities where we could have a conversation, but it's not the sole focus of what we're doing. So like there'd be an activity where you can move. So like going for a hike or going to a gym class or taking the dogs for a walk. And the focus is on what you're doing as opposed to sitting face to face in front of someone trying to hold a conversation. It just makes it so much less awkward. And the cool thing is that you get to experience so much more with your friends. Like, it's actually so much more fun. You can go to markets, you can go to museums. There's so much more to do than simply going for dinner. The last point that I'm going to make is using an app or some form of accountability tool to help you out. So if you're not a client of ours, so lots of our clients are doing either tick boxes for alcohol-free days, or they've got accountability in their check-ins each week to see how they are doing. So in check-ins, there is a little tick box which goes through how much alcohol that you've drunk that week. So there's that level of accountability, or some of our clients are using tracking apps. But if you aren't a client of ours, first of all, why the hell not? Get involved. But you do have the option as well to use an app like Dry January. That is a fantastic app, and it actually tracks, and it's very visual, what days you've drank and what days you haven't. I think it's really good to actually look and be like, oh my God, I've done a whole week without drinking. It could be great to log that and for accountability. And on top of this, like thinking about apps and different ways to connect with other people that are also doing sobriety. So either reaching out to people in the Henley Fitness Lifting Club, if you're one of our clients who are also doing Dry January, there are a lot of you this year. I normally actually do a Facebook group, but honestly, we just haven't had the time. We've got so many big projects coming up and it's just ended up back of the list. But I wanted to do this podcast today anyway. And like I said, there are loads of you guys actually on the Henley Fitness Lifting Club. So go and reach out to each other because it will be really, really good. And there are also really great other kind of sobriety groups. There is one called the Club Soda group. There is another one, I think it's run by Millie Gooch, called the Sober Girls Society, which talks about just sober events in London. That's just two. There are loads that I actually can't remember off the top of my head. If you would like to find more, feel free to send me a DM on Instagram and I will send some over to you. But it's a really nice space to be around other people who are doing it with you for support, for help when you're feeling like you're struggling. And it can just be so great to reach out and vent if you're feeling like you're having a bit of a wobble, or just reassurance on how you're feeling, and people that have been through that as well. There are also some fantastic sobriety books out there. So the one that always springs to mind is one called How to Be a Mindful Drinker. And it is by Laura Willoughby. And that got me through some really tough times. And there are some really great journal prompts in there to explore emotions. It talks about things like having sex for the first time sober and more taboo topics that you might find uncomfortable to talk about with friends and family. But honestly, they hit home for me so much. And I found such peace and comfort in being able to read other people's journeys as well. I really hope that today's top tips have been useful, and I want to end today's episode with a quote. Sobriety forces you to experience feelings that are difficult, like sadness, anxiety, and anger. But learning to sit with those feelings is how you learn to overcome them. And like I said, you might just be doing this to drop a few calories. You might be doing this to build your confidence and come away from alcohol like I did. And whatever the reason that you are leaning into reducing your alcohol or mindful drinking this January, just know that it is only going to benefit you. And let me tell you that from experience. It's one of the best things that I've ever done. And it has really helped me to grow into the person that I am now and feel way more confident in myself and take control of my health. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of the Live Shit Get Banged podcast. I will see you on the next one. Bye.